When Anna Maris, a quietly content woman from a coastal town who lives modestly and keeps her marriage to tech magnate Marcus Vail private, is publicly expelled from a glittering charity gala because she doesn't belong, the humiliating moment becomes the trigger for reckoning. The gala's elite, led by the merciless hostess Vivienne Holston, expect spectacle and status. Instead, they get truth. Marcus, who has kept their marriage secret to protect Anna's autonomy, chooses a blunt, elegant exposure. He announces her as his wife and invites her back to speak. The revelation forces guests to confront their cruelty and reveals the fragile choreography of power, privilege, and shame. In a voice that balances quiet dignity with righteous clarity, Anna reclaims the narrative, not by revenge, but by revealing what real worth looks like: compassion, stewardship, and courage. The story is cinematic and emotionally rich, exploring themes of class, identity, empowerment, and the cost of protecting authenticity in a world that prizes appearances. She arrived early, before the velvet ropes went up and before the orchestra tuned the cello's breath. The marquee outside the Metropole Conference Hall threw a warm rectangle of light across the wet pavement. It was the kind the city used to seduce itself, as if illumination could make anything less ordinary. Anna stood in that light for a moment, hands tucked into the pockets of a coat that had seen better winters, and watched, softly, not with hunger, the men in tuxes and the women in gowns flow past like polished shoals. The gala was an annual thing, a swelling of the city's benevolence and vanity with the same heartbeat. This year, Vivienne Holston had given it the kind of theme that needed her careful touch: luminous legacies. There would be speeches and old money laughter, live auctions where people bought works of art and forgiveness in the same breath. Anna had come because the nonprofit the gala supported, the Harbor House, a shelter for women rebuilding after addiction, was anchored in her town. She had spent the last 5 years there as a caseworker, stitching lives back together with small acts, picking up children from school, reminding a frightened mother that food could wait until she slept, explaining slowly how to file forms that seemed written in a language of indifference. Tonight she carried no agenda but attendance and a ticket printed on thin paper, 2 names, in a script of practiced gentility, reserved in the section for donors. She was not supposed to wear what she wore, a simple navy dress, hemmed by her sister, with a scarf of dull green that smelled faintly of the sea. Her hair was braided behind her neck and pinned with a shell clip her niece had given her. Guests expected costume, cufflinks polished like fossils, perfumes that announced themselves a block away. She expected nothing of the sort. She had a small, private reason for being at the gala, too, a silence she kept like a secret offering. Marcus Vail had once asked her, half joking and entirely earnest, whether she ever wanted the noise of his world. She'd shaken her head. Her work at Harbor House was noise she could live inside. She liked the modest, honest clutter of lives mended. At the front door the hostesses smiled with that careful smile learned in polite breeding schools, their stock of manners glossy as patent leather. One of them, a young woman with an apron of pearls, reached for Anna's wrist to guide her to the guest scanner. "Name?" she asked in a voice that broadcasted discomfort instead of curiosity. "Anna Maris," she said. "I'm with Harbor House. My ticket." The scanner's screen flickered and made a noise that might have been an apology. "Not on the list," the hostess said. She glanced at the list again, as if the letters might reline themselves into truth if given enough attention. A moment of the nowhere between people. Anna smiled the kind of small, deflective smile people make, so they do not make strangers uncomfortable. "It's fine," she said. My friend gave the ticket to me. Perhaps." We can't let guests through without registration," the hostess said. Her fingers were precise, the kind of hands that had never learned to temper rule with discretion. The edges of the woman's mouth tightened and the pearls matched the white of her teeth. "I'm sorry." That little ritual could have ended there. A sober walk home, a story told at the table like a minor misadventure. Instead, a disturbance, the best kind for tabloids, the worst for those who find their dignity like a glass kept between shaky hands, arrived in the crisp figure of Vivienne Holston. Vivienne had that effect. She made rooms shrink and people fold like paper, so her silhouette took up all the space. She wore a gown the color of late summer wine and a smile that was practiced the way a surgeon practices a cut. Her eyes, cooled by years of looking for advantages and points to be scored, scanned Anna like a curator finding an anomaly. "You're not on the list," Vivienne said. But her voice carried something else, an amusement that preferred cruelty and called it taste. Who invited you, dear? My colleague, April, Anna said. And even as she answered, she saw the name of a woman who had worked at Harbour House and now sat quietly in the front row. She had an extra ticket. Vivienne's laugh was small and thin. They must have been teaching the staff to imitate patrons, she said. We can't have staff pretending to be guests. It's disruptive to the evening. Disruptive. The word landed like a coin on the polished marble of the entrance hall and rang sharp. Around them, a ripple of decorative interest spread, some people turning because gossip is the softest entertainment. Anna felt the heat rise to her face, the particular way humiliation colored everything the size of a bruise. She glanced at the hostess and found the projector of her own awkwardness hovering over them both. I'm not, her voice nearly failed. She stilled it like a faltering sail snapping taut. There was the option to explain, to produce the ticket now tucked in the inside pocket of her coat, to root among the folds and show the thin white paper like proof. Instead, she felt in that moment the heavier inventory, the long history of people in her town being dismissed as other, the nights when she'd sat in a car outside a shelter and watched someone light a cigarette as if to measure whether they could take a breath in the world. She had learned to cough in such moments. There would be practical solutions. For now, humiliation was a thing meant to be weathered. I can leave, she said instead. The words were soft and thawed into the night like steam. Vivienne's lips curved. Good. We'd like to keep the evening refined. She took a small, showy step backward as if to perform the motion of dismissal. You understand. Anna took that step. For a moment she stood under the marquee's light like a figure in a painting whose frame was about to be redrawn. She walked away. What no one in the glittering hall noticed was the small, iron hardness of the way she set her shoulders when she moved. She did not run or storm off. She navigated the wet pavement with the careful steadiness of someone who had chosen her path. There was little spectacle. Humiliation, left alone, is often thin and private. She stood for a time on a bench, watching the river reflect chandeliers like splintered stars. There was a low, mischievous part of her that wanted to go home and laugh about the way city people clung to lists as if lists could keep the world tidy. Mostly she wanted to go back inside the temperature of the room. But there was another reason she had put on the dress tonight, a soft, private reason that felt, in the stale air, like holding a candle up to a memory. Marcus Vale arrived an hour later. They had spoken little about his absences. Marcus could, in the way billionaires do, be absent like weather, predictable and then unaccountably violent. He was not what tabloids taught people billionaires to be. He was the founder of Vale Technologies, which had spun from a garage-sized idea into a company whose name people said with a kind of breath that sounded like a prayer. He had eyes that seemed to register the world with keen amusement and with a care that could be wide as a harbor. He had once told her he liked to see how people patch their lives, and she had shown him Harbour House as if she were unveiling a favorite room. They married quietly in a registry office. They never called it anything but us. Marcus had asked that their life together be private. Anna had said yes, because she believed in living small, carefully, away from the glare. The press knew nothing. She liked that. She liked being known to him, to a handful of friends, and to the women they both loved at the Harbour House. He appeared at the water's edge unexpectedly, his coat thrown over one shoulder, hair a little damp from spring rain. Up close he carried the faint smell of tobacco. He smoked when he was worried about code launches, and citrus. Someone on his staff always insisted on carrying a handkerchief with molten citrus oil. He saw Anna on the bench like one recognizes a small, private harbor. His face rearranged to a look that had at its center wanting to fix a wrong that might not need fixing, wanting to protect something fragile. You left, he said, but his voice held no rebuke, only a question that had the shape of care. I was turned away, she said. It could have been shorter. She could have let him reach for her hand and take vengeance for her. Instead, she told the truth of the moment. She told him the exchange with Vivienne as if she were folding an essay. Marcus listened, and something softened in the space between his brows. You shouldn't have been, he said. We should go in. I'm on the board, Anne. Anna looked at him then. The lights of the Gala shimmered across the river as if discontent had been given a costume. The practical part of Marcus's mind already mapped how to rear out security, how to reset entry lists, how to make the very next photograph a corrective. But there was another part of him that watched the city perform the shape of itself and tried always to keep her the way she wanted to be, simple, modest, free of the trappings that worried him into thinner sleep. He had agreed, months ago, that their marriage would not be used as a shield, that she would find her own work without the company name prefacing it. "You can," he said slowly, "but you don't have to." "You should go," she answered. "This evening belongs to them. You don't need." He took her hand. His fingers were warm and honest. "Let me do this my way," he said. "Not to protect you, Anna, but to dismantle what went wrong. Besides," he added with a breath of something like a smile, "I don't enjoy rudeness at my events." She looked at him, the man who owned buildings and algorithms and, in some unquantified ledger, many people's lives. There was a complexity to the offer that she both resented and needed. He had power. He would use it. She could decline and go home and carry the small bruise. Or she could accept his help and risk a wave of attention she had never wanted. "Make it quick," she said. He nodded. What he did was simple and devastating because it required no theater beyond the rawness of the truth. Marcus walked back into the Gala with the sort of unhurried clarity he practiced in boardrooms and hospitals alike. Security stepped away from his presence the way the sea steps from a cliff. Vivienne floated like an island of cultivated outrage near the stage, sipping champagne that tasted of ceremony and expectations. Behind her the donors sat in their rows, wearing the serene faces people cultivate when they invest in charities as well as reputations. Marcus climbed on the low dais with a small, private smile and asked for silence. It fell like a thick, permissible cloak. He spoke without pretense. "Good evening," he said. His voice reached like a tide. He could have named projects, figures, and the sort of statistics people like to quote. How many shelters helped? How many beds had been paid for? How many grant proposals accepted? He did not. "I'm Marcus Vale," he said. For a moment the room took him in as if tasting the name. "Most of you know me as a sponsor and someone who invests in causes. Some of you call this philanthropy. I prefer the word responsibility." Vivienne's smile narrowed. The board shuffled. Cameras, sensing meat for their appetite, leaned forward. There was an expression a cameraman later described to his colleague as the slow bloom of a scandal. Marcus's hand gestured toward the entrance, and two men in suits, clean and calm, walked across the polished floor. Anna rose from her bench, the hem of her dress now damp from the rain, scarf pressed to her chest like a small flag of salt air. The cameras found her the moment she stepped beneath the chandelier's scattered light. Vivienne's eyes moved from Marcus to Anna and then back again, like a person trying to reconcile a painting with the frame it had been promised. The whispers were a tide. "Who is she?" "Is that him?" "He married." Marcus waited until he had their attention and said, plainly, the thing the tabloids had not known for weeks. "This is my wife." The room staggered as if hit by sound. Some plated hands rested on wine glasses to steady. The cameras, hungry for contradiction, made their lenses hungry for smiles that would be offered as proof of a story. Vivienne's face went through an interesting little arithmetic. First disbelief, then anger at being displaced, then an attempt to rearrange the social ledger by a more lavish smile. But people are not always as quick to recover as curated faces suggest. The ledger shuffled with real weight. You must understand that this evening was designed to be a parade of appearances, an exercise in deliberate lightness. A revelation like marriage, which presupposes intimacy and private care, was an incursion. It was beautiful in its ordinariness. Anna had not been hidden in a penthouse. She had been at a bench near a river, wet with rain and almost unconcerned with the optics of her life. The shock of Marcus's announcement was not the headline's desire for scandal but a quiet fracture. People realized that their assumptions about who they shared a room with were shallow. Vivienne, who had cultivated an empire of polite cruelties, saw the possibility of her own diminishment in the eyes of the room. She was quick to pivot, because that is the skill of those who survive by their wits rather than their compassion. "How amusing," she said with a voice like satin curled around a razor. Congratulations, Mr. Vale." "Thank you," Marcus said. He did not step into the maw of vindictiveness. He simply spoke to Anna. Would you join me on stage? It might have been the simplest of requests, but to Anna it felt monumental. Walking up the dais, she felt the scrape of dozens of judgments like static against her skin. She saw Vivienne's face tighten in the rows like a live wire. Yet she also saw Emma, the director of Harbour House, standing in the second row with eyes that were wet and proud. She felt the hum of the audience like an organism waiting for a ritual. She could have chosen silence. She could have let Marcus take the floor and deliver whatever speech would bind the scenario into the public record. Instead, she turned her voice into something like a small, steady light. "Thank you," she said, and it was the kind of thanks that had ancestry, to the women who had taught her to fold their grief into the small dignity of mourning, to the volunteer who had saved the Harbour House's winter fund, to the strangers who had given her shelter when she needed a place to sleep for a night. "I'm Anna," she said. "I work with Harbour House. People call us brave sometimes. They don't know the truth of bravery. It is rarely dramatic." A murmur ran through the room, the softening of old, brittle assumptions. "I was turned away at the door," she continued. She did not look at Vivienne as if to cast blame. She looked the crowd in that way teachers look at students at the moment an important thing must be taught. Not because of anything that was mine to change, but because someone assumed my place. It's an easy habit to have. We scan faces and make lists. The cameras focused. In the back, a man with a napkin half-folded watched with the same interest as a child on the first day of school. Vivienne's jaw clicked. She had prepared a million phrases and filters for such a scenario, but none that would make humiliation anything but a small tragedy to be revised. "What I want to say," Anna went on, and her voice grew firm not in anger but in clear authority, "is that when you categorize people, you cost them the dignity of entering a room with their claim. The Harbour House is a place where women learn to call rooms their own. Tonight I came because the work you hear about, your gifts and auctions, is real. It saves lives. I didn't dress like you because my life does not require it. I didn't need to look a certain way to prove my worth." You could hear the movement in the room then, like a colony of birds shifting in collective acknowledgement. Not everyone softened. In the front rows, those who had built careers on the currency of appearances stiffened, but a good many faces shifted, as if a small, accessible truth had been nudged into daylight. "For those of you who made assumptions tonight, I forgive you," she said. The word fell light, but had the heft of a white stone. Because assumptions love company. "But I also ask you this, what would it look like if you paused and asked a person before you pronounced their place? What would it look like if you asked a woman for her name and listened?" Marcus stood behind her, the shape of support without domination. He knew, as she did, that showing was better than punishing. The cameras would have their photographs of Vivienne's displeasure, but the memory that would hurt more, if it did, was the small, conscious unraveling of habit. Vivienne attempted for a moment to steer the narrative with venom disguised as civility. "What a touching anecdote," she said, and the applause line she tried to manufacture failed to find traction. People clapped politely anyway, the sound more skewed by respect than scripted habit. After the speech, the journalists did their calculus. A headline is generous with irony. "Billionaire's wife ousted from Gala. Spectacle ensues." Social feeds did what they do. Some praised Anna's humility, some attacked her softly with the practiced cruelty of those who find comfort in rank. For Vivienne, the night was a bruise to be smoothed with later strategizing. For the Harbour House, Marcus's pledge, a considerable gift, practical and thoughtful, the kind that would pay for rehab beds and legal aid, was delivered with the company's board and a direct line to fund operations. It would have been easy for Anna to let the evening become about power rebalanced, retribution standard, humiliations squared with wealth. But she was not moved by that particular arithmetic. Privilege wielded as a cudgel is still privilege. What she wanted was normalizing dignity. A week after the gala, she walked into a meeting at Harbour House to find a framed photograph waiting on the wall. The stage that night, Marcus and her standing under the chandelier, Vivienne's face a study in social surprise. Emma had placed it there with a small card. "For those who forget, people are not props." Marcus joined her as she adjusted the photo's angle. He watched her with an expression that had become familiar, sometimes bewildered by the ordinary courage that had been her life before him, always proud. "You surprised me," he said. "You did me a favor," she said. "You didn't have to expose me." "No," he said. "But I wanted you to know that I'm on your side in public when you don't want to be in the spotlight alone. I'll fight for that right with you, quietly, if you like. Just not with humiliation as the measure." She smiled, small and private. "I don't need you to make everything right. I need you to hand me the tools." He handed her his hand. It was simple enough. Vivienne's life continued its choreography of parties and alleged smiles. She learned slowly, like those who have been taught to think of themselves as invulnerable, that a private life can undo public reputation. Small donors shifted their chatter to new enthusiasms. Some people came to Harbor House to volunteer because they were embarrassed, then stayed because the work was unexpectedly complicated and wonderfully real. A few of Vivienne's acquaintances admired Anna's speech on their feeds and sent notes that were brittle with apology. Some of their apologies were genuine, some were performative. The world contains both. Anna continued her work. She taught one young woman to write a resume, and another to count the days between sobriety as a kind of medal that did not have to be flashed. She and Marcus built a modest fund, money hidden behind paperwork so it could do practical things like housing vouchers and therapy hours without the press breathing down their necks. He did not insist on naming it the Veil Foundation. She liked the anonymity of the sheets that arrived at Harbor House with no fanfare. Occasionally, when journalists dug for a story and refused to let a woman keep a private life, Marcus stepped forward and repeated two words as if they were shatters. She asked. In the long, softer sweep of months, Vivienne apologized at a donor luncheon with a performance that had the shape of contrition. Her apology landed on a table of people hungry for reconciliation more than truth. Some accepted it. Some felt the apology like seeing someone rearrange curtains after a storm and declare the house whole. Anna received the apology with the same diplomatic firmness she brought to other parts of her life. She did not gloat. Gloating has a small, cracking joy, and is best left to children and tabloids. When the story settled into its new contour, the woman who had been kicked out was a billionaire's wife. The city told the tale in the way cities tell tales, clumsily, with a hunger to judge. In the quieter rooms, people told it as a lesson. If you bump into the world and find it valorizing appearances, remember to ask a person for her name. If someone offers you power, use it to create more room for others, not to amplify shame. There was a moment, months later, when Marcus and Anna stood at the Harbor House's back garden at a late afternoon fundraising picnic. Children clambered over painted chairs, while volunteers passed plates of food that tasted better than their price. Vivienne's return to the center for a tour, after she'd made her apology and been accepted by a slim majority of the board, felt like watching a person navigating a narrow bridge. She moved tentatively, asking questions with the kind of earnestness that may have been born of curiosity or from the understanding that life had a way of surprising people into humility. Vivienne met Anna by the garden's small fountain, where errant sunlight made the water look like speckled glass. She hesitated, then spoke. "I was cruel," she said. The sentence was small and direct. It did not carry the weight of full confession, but was where real change begins. "I saw what I wanted to see, and refused to look further." Anna considered the woman and found in her face something not wholly hardened. People are, often, more complicated than the parts they play. She could have replied with a list of grievances, but something in her wanted, still, to normalize dignity over victory. "Thank you for saying that," Anna said. "It's easier to be cruel when you think the cost will never be paid personally. It's harder when you see the cost. That's where change starts." Vivienne nodded, and for a beat their eyes held a fragile negotiation, a truce not over territory, but over how they might walk in a public life. It was not a dramatic conversion. It was a small, human thing. Months folded into years, and the story became a part of the Harbor House's lore, the woman who had been kicked out and then welcomed as a force for the vulnerable. People told it to each other, not because it made for good gossip, but because it carried a kind of practical grace. Anna's life did not become gilded overnight. Being married to a billionaire is not a magic carpet. It is, in most cases, a complex weaving of choices. She was sometimes jealous of Marcus's ease with money. He was sometimes outpaced by the modest patience of her work. They negotiated like gardeners, pruning, building, sometimes letting things die so new growth could occur. In the end, the night the Gala tried to erase her from the room became less about shame and more about the need for a consistent humanity. The city learned, in small measures, to listen, to ask names, to pause with their lists, to extend the dignity of a seat. The scandal that might have burned fizzled into a correction, a note in the Chronicle reminding people that assumptions are cheap and the labor of listening is expensive but worth it. People sometimes asked Anna, in the months after the gala, whether she had wanted Marcus to reveal them the way he did. She would smile, a little private knowing, and say only that love is most useful when it preserves the other person's choices. She had wanted the dignity of being herself, not a prize to be paraded. Marcus had given her exactly that, the choice. And if you ask the women at Harbour House, they will tell you that the best part was not the spectacle but the pledge that followed, that the harbour would receive the kind of care that meant fewer people would stand on benches in the rain, feeling listed and judged, and more would be at dining tables where their names were said aloud, and their stories listened to. That was the change Anna wanted, and in the end it was a change the city needed.